seeing where I've come now and seeing the career that I've been able to make in the music business and as a speaker, having that success from knowing where I came from. I was a kid that had a hard time reading. I had a hard time with word comprehension. So to have my life be based upon words and music, that's, regardless of what the details were, like how many hits I had or how many songs I had recorded by other people or all those things that we typically think of as success. The success for me is just, I think about having had almost a 40-year career with words and music.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of I Know This Guy, the podcast where we dive deep into the lives of some of the most interesting people I know. Before we get started, please like and subscribe to I Know This Guy wherever you get your podcasts. By the way, my kids want me to say something about ringing a bell. What the hell's a bell? It's the big guy.
All right. So, Dad, who do we have on for the podcast?
All right. Do you remember Larry Broughton?
I sure do.
All right. So Larry has recommended Michael Peterson. So Michael is a country music singer, songwriter. He's got multiple hits, number one hits, and he's got an incredible life. I mean, wait till you hear it.
Yeah, can't wait to dive into this one.
All right. Well, let's get to it. All right, Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks. Appreciate that.
I can't wait to get into this story. Why don't we just dig into your backstory? So what makes Michael Michael?
I have a suspicion that all of us are born with certain inclinations or things that we're attracted to. And I don't know that anyone can say for sure whether that's genetic or a calling or a destiny that you're born, to this reality to fulfill, or if it's something that emerges just out of the soil that you're in. But for better or for worse, as a very young man, I had a tremendous amount of attraction towards music and towards words and writing. As a young person also, I was, in a difficult family situation and was struggling with some challenges in terms of my ability to process information and learning. So a lot of things that maybe came easy to other kids in school didn't come that easy to me. I had trouble reading. I had trouble with math. And because of what was happening in my home, I found it, I think, difficult to keep my focus when it came to dealing with things that were difficult for me to comprehend or process. So with that as a context, the things that came easy to me, like any kid, you're looking for a way to succeed and something you can hang your hat on to say, well, I'm good at that. The things that came easy to me were words and music. That's where I began to sprout and grow up in. And, as you go along through your life, get feedback from people. And so when you get positive feedback, I think if that's something you enjoy and you're getting positive feedback, then that also adds into that answer to the question, what makes any one of us who we are. So, you get nurtured along the way, you get encouraged, and you're having fun doing it. And so, now at 61.
Are you 61?
Yeah.
You sure don't look it.
Well, that's very nice. So at 61, I look back on my life and I say that I see that I still have this pervasive is the right word, pervasive attraction towards creativity, words, music, and expressing that in a way that's not just self-centered, but that has a desire behind it to somehow communicate with other people, to have it be meaningful to others. So I'd say if you had to identify, like, what is the thing that makes Michael Peterson, it's sort of weird, I guess, to speak about yourself in third person, but that makes any of us who we are. You have to look and see what are the core things that have been there over the course of decades. So for me, it's really about words, communication, creativity, all of that connected to a purpose that's bigger than myself, the joy that I find in engaging with others, in seeing these miracles happen in their lives, things sprout up in their lives that maybe came about as a part of our interactions. Sometimes that looks like a book that I might write. Sometimes it's a song that I might write or sing or perform. Sometimes it's an interview like this. You know, there may be people after this interview that will send me a note that says something I said made a difference to them. That really feels great to me. And I'd say that, you know, over the course of my whole life, I've done many things, but that core has always been a part of those things consistently. So I say that I'm a man of words, probably too many words, but I think that's the core of who I am. I have a real heart for people, a real desire to make a difference in other people's lives, and I love creating stuff.
About what age were you when you decided that music was going to be it?
Junior high, high school, I just knew that was something I was good at. I loved it. I got into college. My father was murdered when I was 15, and my stepdad committed suicide when I was 17. So I had a lot of emotional stuff going on, and music seemed to be a soothing balm, you know, for my sorrow and my sadness and my worries and my hopes. And so I remember being a freshman in college, and there was an album by a guy named Dan Fogelberg called, well, I can even show it to you. I've got it right here. I keep it out because it's such a seminal album for me. It's an album called Netherlands. I just buried my dad. I was about a week or two after I'd buried my dad, and I was standing in a department store, and they had a little rack of records, LPs, you know, across the room. Yeah, I don't know why it is, but this one particular album caught my attention, and it was this album cover. And I didn't know who the artist was. I'd never heard of him before. But somehow in this photograph, there was something in this photograph of this album cover that captured this kind of melancholy, contemplative, thoughtful place that I was in my life at that time, you know, having just buried my dad. So I bought this album, and the album just spoke deeply to me with everything that I was going through. And so I think, you know, the answer to your question is kind of at that moment, I got a guitar. I started having an interest in songwriting because this music moved me so much. And I thought, well, if maybe I could express myself in a way that would help me feel better. And maybe, I don't know, maybe I could make some music that could do for other people what this guy's music did for me. So I was probably 18 or 19, I guess, at that point. And I really, you know, started trying to write things and, you know, go down to the open mic they had on campus every week, you know, and put my name on the list and hope to be able to get up and try to sing something that I wrote. I think that's really where it started for me.
So, you know, there I was, you know, my freshman year in college, and this record from Dan Fogelberg, the Netherlands album, which I had found, you know, 2 weeks after my dad passed, had just profoundly impacted my life. And you know, my freshman year in college, I started, you know, trying to write songs, and I got a guitar and started trying to play those songs for other people. You know, I think that's really where I got bit by this bug. And I would say that from the time I was 24, maybe until now, you know, I've probably written 25 to 30 songs a year. And of course, you wouldn't want to hear them all. But you know, it's just something that's become a part of my life. So I feel like it's connected. Somehow it's connected to why I'm here.
Right. You got your guitar. Were you self-taught?
Say it again.
When you got your guitar and you decided to play an instrument, were you self-taught?
Yeah, I never took guitar lessons from anybody. Although, you know, when people say they're self-taught, I always kind of chuckle because I had 1,000 teachers. You know,
right.
But they weren't formal lessons. You know, the way I did, I would get it like I was a big James Taylor fan, still am, and Dan Fogelberg, and I would go buy the sheet music, and I would buy the sheet music with a tablature on it, so you could see where to put your fingers on the guitar, and I would sit and listen to the records, and try to figure out how they were doing what they were doing, and then I had friends who play guitar, and they'd show me stuff, and yeah.
So what were your other inspirations?
At that time of my life, obviously, inspiration is a word that carries with it a kind of a super positive connotation. And I guess this, in a way, is positive. But, you know, the death of my father's was a great inspiration to me. I mean, I just felt so deeply affected and profoundly affected by by that, the deaths of both my dads. I was a young man who, probably about age 14 or 15, had a transformational experience, spiritual experience at a church camp. That was a source of inspiration for me. That was a big part, I think, of getting me through those difficult childhood years, was feeling like I was grounded or connected to a spiritual source. And then I think, I played football in college at Pacific Lutheran University. And that was a major, major part of inspiration for me. The fellowship that I had, the friendships that I had, the family that became to me when, quite literally my family had disintegrated. That became a great source of inspiration for me. And then I think, above and beyond that, and maybe woven in the midst of all of that, were, people like James Taylor, John Denver, Gordon Lightfoot, Don McLean, Jim Croce, my grandmother. My grandmother was a tremendous inspiration to me. She was consistently a person who just loved me just because she loved me. And I felt that love, and I felt safe around her, and felt like it was good times whenever I was with her. It was always, we shared music and we laughed. And so I think, those would be, those were my inspirations. And all kinds of music, really. Everything from Lambert Hendricks and Ross and the Singers Unlimited to anything that was pop on the radio, anything from, as a kid, I guess I was in high school in the late 70s. So, Bachman Turner Overdrive, Aerosmith, the Beatles. I mean, all of that sort of what we call classic rock now. And, ending up in country music as a songwriter and as an artist, a lot of those artists are from the South, and their roots and their inspirations came from, being exposed to a lot of country music. I wasn't exposed to a lot of country music. I grew up in the Northwest. The only country music I really heard was the country music that had crossed over to the top 40. So my musical inspirations, ran a very wide gamut and still do. And I'm one of those guys who says, really honestly, music should be without prejudice. I think people should. I think the sort of the idea that if you don't like and just only dedicate yourself to one kind of music, then somehow you're not really part of that musical family. Sometimes there's a sort of a conceit around music that pops up that way, and that's okay if people want to feel that way. I just don't. I think there's only two kinds of music: the kind you like and the kind you don't. And I like all kinds of music. So I think those are the things that inspired me, and probably largely still do.
One of the things I talked to Hayden about, he's a jazz musician. So ask him about the different music, the different types of music that he's heard from around the world, or the different genres. Does he work that into his jazz? It might be a certain genre, but all of a sudden he's starting to influence it with, this type of genre. Have you found that you've done that with your country music as well?
Well, yeah, I think that, when you're creating anything, you're putting it through this filter, and whatever's in that filter has the potential of, becoming part of the DNA of whatever it is you're creating. So here's would be a good example for me. Probably 1996, maybe. I hadn't moved to Nashville yet, but I was writing with some, established writers in town, and there was starting to be a little bit of a buzz, I think, around town about me, as there is when you find young talent that comes in and that's making a bit of a splash and making some noise. People start kind of buzzing about it. So I was recognizing that there was starting to be a little bit of a buzz in town about me. So as a result of that, I was able to find writing appointments with higher caliber writers. One day I was writing with this very well-known songwriter, and he asked me, it was my first writing appointment with him, and he asked me, to play him something that I was really proud of that I'd written. So I played him this song that had some augmented chords in it and a diminished chord. And he told me pretty much matter-of-factly that would never fly in country music. That country music is about 1, 4, and 5, maybe a minor, a 2 minor or something. But, you can't get too complicated with country music. It has to stay, like Harlan Howard said, and I agree with Harlan Howard, country music is 3 chords and the truth, right? And I get that. I totally get that. But I also think that if you if you are trying to express emotions, sometimes it helps if you have a larger selection of tones that you can pull from. So if you have a diminished chord or an augmented chord or some kind of strange chord, to me that adds color. And if you flash back to the 60s in country music, Patsy Cline and Eddie Arnold and these artists, their records weren't 1, 4, and 5. They had a lot of musicality to their music that they're creating. So getting outside of the box for me, what other people thought was getting outside of the box was in the box for me, because I grew up listening to Manhattan Transfer, and I was in jazz choir, and I love jazz music. So I loved film score music, so stuff that was really orchestrated, that had interesting chords and movements and emotions in it. This wasn't outside of the box for me. This was right in the box, It just didn't happen to be in the box of what a lot of people think is country music. So, unavoidably, I brought all of that with me. And interestingly enough, as a sort of a close to that story, that song that guy said you couldn't do that way ended up being a single for me and was a top 20 record. So, I guess rules are made to be broken.
Right.
Well, you also mentioned that, it's 1, 4, and 5, and then the truth. But if the truth is for you is, those other colors and those other emotions woven into it, then you're going to have, that's maybe the stronger thing to focus on.
I love that, what you just said. And the truth is, for each of us, there's a lot of things that motivate why we create anything. When I was younger, the things that were driving me to create, my ambitions, were woven into that natural inclination that I had. But as I've gotten older, I'm less ambitious. And so sometimes I think my ambitions colored my creativity in ways that were limiting, or I don't want to say, I guess it's a deeper conversation, but my point being that as I've gotten older, and some of the stuff that drives you when you're younger, some of your ambitions, whether it's fame or money or whatever, those things aren't as important anymore. And so I'm finding that I'm creating for the joy of creating. And I have now 40 years of experience that I'm not an apprentice anymore. I'm a journeyman songwriter. And so all of that brings to bear in a way that I think is allowing me to, create in many ways some of the most beautiful things I've ever created at this point in my life, even though I'm not, really in the spotlight right now. I think some of the stuff I'm writing now is as good or better than I'll ever do.
You came from the Northwest, and I love talking to people about, getting them to move to Nashville. That must have been a scary move. You grew up, you didn't grow up in a city, did you?
Well, I grew up in a town of about 27,000 people, I think is what the population was. And it was largely a farming community, but it also was right near the Hanford reactor. So it was a big government contracting area as well. A lot of people working on nuclear power there. So farming community, small farming community, rural, mostly agriculture, and then some government work there. But then after I graduated high school through college, I lived in a big city. I lived in Tacoma, Washington. And then, after that, from 1980 to 2000 and to 1996, I guess. So, all those years I lived in the Northwest, and I lived in the Seattle area. So, I knew big towns pretty well. And I didn't get to Nashville overnight. I started going, once or twice a year for a couple of years, and just trying to learn a little bit about what it was all about. And then on one of those trips, a guy that I met who was a senior VP at BMG, music publishing, said to me that no one was going to take me serious if I came to town once a year. So, either come a lot or don't waste your time. So I started going a week a month. And I went a week a month to Nashville for somewhere between 2 and 3 years. When you go 12 times, 13 times a year over a couple of years, you really start to get a sense of where you fit, and you start to know people. And it wasn't like I just packed up all my stuff and just moved cold and got there and was like, what am I going to do now? I actually laid the groundwork for all of that before I got there. In fact, I didn't make a decision to move there until I had been offered a deal from EMI, songwriting deal from EMI. That was my goal. I said, I'm not going to move until I have something really substantial to move for.
What year was that?
That was 1996.
So I feel like within entertainment industries, typically like the big cities for either musicians or comedians or, the whole gambit would be to make that move to like New York, LA, or Nashville. So I'm curious, like with your strategy to kind of take it in chunks, like what were you accomplishing on those smaller visits before you made that record deal? Like how did you kind of find your place before moving?
Well, those are great. That's a great question, and those are great thoughts, because we all have a journey of how we're going to get something done. And over the years, I've had young people occasionally ask me, "Well, how did you do it?" And over the years, I've come to a place where I think that when young people ask me that question, they're really asking, "How am I going to make it?" not how did Michael Peterson make it, but how am I going to make it? Mm-hmm. They're looking for some roadmap. I usually just say to them, I don't know how you're going to do it, but I do know this: it's easier to steer a moving car. So get moving, right? And for me, when I got to Nashville, the first thing I did, it's my intuition, I guess. I went and found one of the local music scene magazines or newspapers. I suppose every city that has music has them. In Seattle, it was a thing called The Rocket, I think is what it was called. And I knew that there was probably something like that in Nashville. So I scrummed around when I first got to town, and I found one of these music mags, and it listed in it where all of the clubs were and where all of the open mics were. And I thought, well, I don't know anybody here. I don't know really where to go or what to do. But let me go where I think there's music happening. So I started hanging out at these clubs when I'd come to town, and I would find out when these open mics were, and I would, instead of just going right away and putting my name on the list, I probably went a half a dozen times and just watched, because I didn't know where I fit. I didn't know if my talent was up to par. I didn't know, if what I was writing was something I thought people would enjoy. I just figured there was a lot I didn't know, and before I did anything too aggressive, it would be a good idea to try to get an understanding of the landscape. So that proved to be really a good decision, because I saw a lot of people so eager to make an impression, but they weren't ready yet. Like they weren't as good as they thought they were. Mm-hmm. And so they made, poor impressions. And, you never get a second chance to make a first impression, right? So I just was careful. I waited and I learned and I watched and I met people and I asked a lot of questions. And then over time, when I started thinking, well, I think I have one or two things that might work, then I started putting my name on these, open mic nights, and I'd get up and, try to play my songs. And then I'd get feedback, and then I'd meet people, and then we'd trade cards, and then we'd have lunch. And over the course of, 3 or 4 years, I guess, I started feeling like people, I had contacts there and people knew who I was, and some people were looking forward to me coming back. And I started to develop relationships. And I decided that it was a good idea to not be in too big of a rush. Again, sort of goes back to, you don't know what you don't know. So instead of being in such a rush, take time to educate yourself about what the landscape is and see where you might fit. Build some meaningful relationships so that when you hit the ground, you don't feel like you're all alone. And see if you can get something going so that when you move there, it's not like, what do I do now? But you actually hit the ground with a path. So that, over a course of a couple of years, that's what I did. And it was really a good decision.
Yeah. One of the things that you said, and this is really interesting because I work with a lot of online sellers or people that want to work from home and build a brand on Amazon or, Shopify or whatever. And they jump into it. They don't take the time to either take a course or see where they fit in or see where their brand fits in. And what you were just describing, I think this is across so many different, not just music or art, but right across the business world as well. Take your time, understand, like you said, you've got one time to impress. And if you launch a product or if you do something in business, you can always go back and fix it. But you could have launched so much more successfully if you would have just been cautious and, taken your time a bit more rather than just jump to a launch. So just found it interesting that you said that.
It's a good point to make, is that these are principles that are not affixed to any particular genre of business. There's just sort of some lessons that you learn. And it wasn't like I read it in a book or anything. I just had a feeling, which doesn't make me special. I think it makes me fortunate, I guess, that I had a feeling that I should be more careful with it. In any of our lifetimes, we take a lot of hits from, what's that old saying about experience comes from, or good judgment comes from experience, but experience comes from bad judgment.
Yeah.
Right. So, I've had my share of, that wasn't a good thing to do, but, I've also had a couple of really good decisions that I made. And that was one of them.
Music industry can take its toll with travel. Did you like the traveling?
Yeah, I did. I loved it. I would say, okay, so COVID, right? Here we are in the middle of COVID. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've experienced out of COVID, which, sort of unanticipated, I'm 61 years old. And and I'm not exaggerating here, this is the first time in my adult life, since I was probably 23, that I have had consecutive months at home without traveling. 10 months I haven't traveled. I haven't been on the road anywhere. That'd be the first time since I was probably 23.
Wow. So,
prior to COVID, my wife and I were on the road about 150 to 180 days a year. So, it's just a way of life for me, right? Mm-hmm. So this is the first time that I've had a chance to be home and really just love my house and get a routine. And, my life has been, packing and unpacking. I remember when my kids were really little, they thought I worked on an airplane. Mm-hmm. They'd see a jet in the sky and they'd say, "Oh, that's where Dad works," because I'm getting up and going. Yeah, so I enjoy the travel. I love, but I guess as I've gotten older, there's a sort of a cliche, but it's like I would say to people, my least favorite part of my job is all the waiting. Waiting to get there and waiting to have it all happen. Favorite part is the performing part. Mm-hmm. The engaging with people part. That I don't get paid for that. I get paid for sleeping in hotel beds, and flying on airplanes and moving around all the time. That's what I get paid for, and having to figure out how to eat in a way that doesn't make you weigh 400 pounds, on the road. And
I've never figured that out.
Yeah, well, that's a challenge, right? Those are inherent challenges with traveling a lot. So I don't know how COVID has changed me, because it's still, I think, likely that we are months and months and months away from the entertainment world becoming anything that looks like what it did before in terms of work. I wouldn't be surprised if we're another year to 18 months away from, everybody from the ticket sellers to the venue owners to the people that manage artists to the fans. All of that has to sort of line up in a way that ensures that when you have an event, people want to be there, or they even have a place to have an event. And I think we're probably a year to 18 months away from that. So I don't know how I'm going to be on the backside of this. I may find that I want to travel less. Mm-hmm. There's some fun things developing for me in Brazil, so I'm looking forward to that. But who knows how long it's going to take.
We have just come off a couple incredible interviews with some Brazil musicians.
Really?
Yes, incredible.
Wow, tell me about that.
Well, Hayden, why don't we get into that? Let's talk about some of those. If you go to Brazil, we'll make some introductions and you'll be blown away.
Oh yeah, I'm going to Brazil. There's no question about it. It looks like I've got a major record label down there. We're going to make a record. So
oh, no way,
it's coming. You know.
Great.
Well, tell me about these guys you met and what.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with Dorival Caymmi or Dori Caymmi. Well, we had Dori Caymmi on, who's the son of Dorival Caymmi. And in Brazil, Dorival is on the same level as Antonio Carlos Jobim.
Okay.
Like they're equal partners in songwriting. So we had his son, who was an incredible arranger. He was really involved with like 60s MPB music in Brazil, and was also living in Los Angeles for a few years there too.
Well, very cool.
Yeah. And a few classical musicians as well that have been on.
Yeah, Marcelo Brodsky was on. Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, it's funny. Brazil keeps coming up.
Super interesting place. People think of Brazilian music, and you think of Jobim, and you think of people like this and that kind of like samba and that kind of that kind of music. But surprise, surprise, like Brazil has its own version of country music. Did you guys know that?
I didn't know that.
Okay, so it's called sertaneja.
Okay.
Oh,
and it might surprise you to know that. If I were to let me ask you, like, what do you think the most popular sport is in Brazil?
I just off the top, I would probably say soccer.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
that's what most people would say. Did you know that the number one sport in Brazil is rodeo?
Get out of here!
No way.
Well, they'll have 150 to 200,000 people at a rodeo.
Really?
Yeah, because they have such a big agricultural, cattle farming and that is just. There's a huge not Western, we call it Western, it's American, the huge farming culture there, right? So they have their own version of country music, and they sell millions and millions and millions of albums. Like there were several artists down there in the 90s that sold 10 million albums off of one record. Yeah. So the guy that I'm working with is a guy that was one of the big producers and songwriters in the 90s down there. His name's Cesar Augusto. And he's won 4 Grammys in the Latin Grammys. And he's had over 1,000 songs of his be recorded. And he's had songs and produced artists and had songs on album sales of over 100 million just in Brazil. So, it's just a really interesting time to be engaging with that. And when I think of Brazilian music, like you said, I think of Jobim and Girl from Ipanema, and that's kind of what you think of. Is it bossa nova?
Yeah.
Is that bossa nova? But there's this whole other world. Like if you went on YouTube and you typed in Brazilian country music, you'd be stunned. Page after page after page after page, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands. Some of the videos on there have 200, 300 million views.
I got to, after this, I am going to check that out. I had no idea.
Yeah, it's incredible. And it's the Brazilian country music has more in common with, I would say, like if you think of music from the 70s in the US, like singer-songwriter and soft rock, so there was a little more lush production, more melody driven. Like a lot of modern records in country today seem like they're super compressed. So everything is loud, and it's more about the groove and a hook that it's more like dance music in a way. And I don't mean that in any way to be critical. I'm just saying if you observe what these records are, they are very loud records. And there's a lot going on, and it almost seems as though sometimes the vocal or the melody is not meant to be the focus. It's the whole soundscape that's meant to be the focus. You know what I mean, right? Yeah. So the music down in Brazil, the country music down in Brazil, is more like 70s music was in the U.S. It's more about the lyric. It's more about that melody. And the productions that they're making are just less busy. They're Like US, they're more like what I just described, I guess. So I'm excited to be making a record down there. And I think you guys would find that you really, really like it. I'm learning Portuguese. Nice. I've been about 4 months. I've been studying Portuguese, and I'm looking forward to that. Anyway, that's a bit of a side road to run down. But yeah, I'm excited about Brazil, and I'm excited that you guys have some contacts down there. Maybe I'll look forward to meeting them.
And I know, like, these contacts they're just so nice. They've been on, and even the people they've led us to, other people, not non-musicians in Brazil. So we will definitely make sure that you get their names. And yeah. So I'm kind of curious, is there a favorite album that you have, or a favorite song that, it's just something you look back at and for one reason or another, it's your favorite?
Well, there's going to be many, I suppose there would be for any of us, but songs that come to mind. James Taylor has a song called The Secret of Life. That would be one. There's a song by an artist named Bob Bennett called Matters of the Heart. Beatles, The Long and Winding Road. Mm-hmm. Songs of mine that are favorites, most of them are songs people have never heard. A song called In Black. Yeah, there's so many songs that mean something to me. The Beatles, In My Life.
Yeah, right.
But not the Beatles version isn't my favorite version of it. My favorite version of it is a version, an obscure version by he just died. He played James Bond, Sean Connery. Yeah, Sean Connery did a version of In My Life on an album that was the last album that Sir George Martin produced before he passed. And it was an album, I don't remember the name of the album, but it was interesting because Martin, of course, had access to all of those Beatles masters, right?
Yeah.
So did you guys hear this record?
I believe I did, yeah.
They had new artists come in and do new vocals over the original tracks.
Yeah, I remember that.
In My Life, I think that's what it's called. So the Sean Connery version of In My Life is like, it's just stone cold. It's like amazing. Like, there are places I remember. And it's a kind of thing. Oh, another great song would be a song called Here's to Life. Great jazz performance, and I'm trying to remember the singer's name. It's skipping my mind right now, but yeah, just songs that you hear over and over again, that you choose to hear over and over again. September by Earth, Wind and Fire.
Yes.
Yeah, you put me on the spot. It's hard to think. Dan Fogelberg, Lessons Learned off of the Netherlands record. Another great recording. The Netherlands album and most of the Dan Fogelberg records were produced by a guy named Norbert Putnam. And Norbert's very well known. In fact, he might be a great guest for your show. In fact, that would be a great call. Norbert produced The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down for Joan Baez. He produced the first 5 Jimmy Buffett albums, including Margaritaville. Norbert's a Hall of Famer, really a legend in the music business. And Norbert and I have become friends over the last few years. And he produced some tracks for the Dan Fogelberg tribute record, one of which was a version of Netherlands with the final vocal performance that Donna Summer ever did. So surprise, surprise, Donna Summer, like this R&B superstar diva, right, was a huge Dan Fogelberg fan. Go figure, right? That's the power of music. Like, you wouldn't think that she would love Dan Fogelberg, but she loved that song Netherlands, loved Dan Fogelberg. And her last performance, before she passed away to cancer a few years back, was her performance of Netherlands. And it's stunning. It's breathtaking. And it's on the Dan Fogelberg tribute record where they, in this case, Norbert was able to use the original tracks, but you put Donna Summer's vocal on it. It's unbelievable. So those are songs that come to mind.
Wow. Hayden, do you have any questions?
I was actually, to bring it back, you were talking about the production, or the differences in production on like country music in America now compared to that Brazilian label. Like, how involved are you with that side of the album? Like, you write the songs, you perform the songs, but how involved in the actual production and creation of the soundscapes and everything are you, or have you been throughout your albums? I've
been very involved in setting tone,
right.
With regards to the Brazilian project, that's a whole new arena for me down there. Cesar Augusto is, a Grammy Award-winning producer and sold a lot of records and knows that market down there really well. So, hey, I'm going to really lean on his sense of where I fit and the expertise. I can't tell you too much more about the kind of record we're going to make at this point, because it's an incredible idea that he had, and we're going to chase it with gusto. We already are. I think I'll really, I'll bring my vocal, and if there's something that bothers me, I'll say it. I'm sure it's the same with you, Hayden. Things that you, let's say, really dug 20 years ago, you have a different perspective on now. So as you go through the journey of making records, you learn stuff. I'm at a place now where I really am starting to understand what people meant when they said the record was getting in the way of the song. Right?
Yeah.
So I'm really at a place where it's like, I recognize that for me as a writer, sometimes the beauty of what I've written has gotten lost in the record. Like the nuance of the subtlety of a turn of a phrase or a, sort of was not able to be highlighted. It was sort of overwhelmed by the sonic landscape. So I don't know. I feel like in the future, I'd like to make records that highlight by peeling away sound, that highlight the lyric more and those melodies more. And so I think they'd be more sparse. I would think so. So, that doesn't mean that I don't like those other kinds of records. I do. I like records that are sonic assault. Not always is a principle, but sometimes when it works, it really works. It gives you a good shot of adrenaline. But I don't want everything to be that. I want to have a variety. One of the things that I've had people tell me over the years was that, let's say, for instance, my first single was a song called Drink, Swear, Steal, and Lie. And then my second single was a song called From Here to Eternity. Okay, if you didn't know that they were the same artist, you wouldn't be able to tell by the records. Where it's like sometimes the old music business adage was, if you had a hit, like your first hit, then follow it with a song that sounds kind of like it was a takeoff on that hit. And then you develop a sound, right? You develop people go, oh, that's so-and-so. I know that's Jimmy Buffett because it sounds like the beach, right? You have a sound. And if there's been some feedback that I've gotten over the years about my music is that the variety was so wide that at times people wouldn't have known it was me. Like if they were a fan of one song, but then they were a fan of Drink, Swear, Steal, and Lie, but then they heard From Here to Eternity. Unless you told them it was me, they wouldn't have known it was me. So that's made it harder to develop my brand, I think, in some ways, because I have such wide variety of musical taste and things that turn me on. And I'm capable as a singer of covering a lot of ground. So, I suppose in my joy of wanting to explore all of that, I think sometimes made it more difficult, I suppose, for me to develop a sonic signature, and I don't have any regrets about that. It is what it is. I've had fun doing it and doing it that way. But those are I think those are things you think about when you have that conversation, production wise,
Right. And like you said, two different songs. If I didn't know it was you, I wouldn't have thought the both were made by you. What was it like getting your first hit, like Drink, Swear, Steal, and Lie?
Yeah.
Well, how did you feel?
Oh, well, first of all, I think my first feeling was I was excited, because it's so rare, for anybody ever to have a hit record. And I'm not saying that now as a boast. I'm saying it's like looking back, I had a whole group of friends that had all come to town about the same time as me. And everybody had this dream of having a hit record. So, there were one or two of us out of my year group, so to speak, that had that experience. So, you're getting a lot of congratulations and a lot of attaboys from your friends. And of course, you want to succeed and you want to keep going, but it's also all brand new. It's in a way, it's like you don't know what you're feeling because you're right in the middle of it, right? You can only know what you're feeling or give words to it after you get away from it for a few years and can look back on it and go, yeah, that's what that meant. But when you're right in the middle of it, it's like you're riding a topa whirl, or a rocket ship. I remember I went skydiving one time, the only time I went. And after we landed, we jumped out of this plane at, I don't know, I'm going to say we jumped out about 15 or 18,000 feet. And when we landed, I said to the guy that was tandem jumping with me, carrying me down, I said, can we do it again? And this time I'll be in my body. So it's kind of like that.
Yeah.
It's like, it's all happening really fast. You don't have really any training for it, so to speak, of how to process it, what it means to be suddenly like, I don't know. My first three singles all went to #1, not on Billboard, but on CMT. And at that time, CMT, was considered a major chart. And my first 3 singles were all top 10 on the Billboard chart, a #1, a #3, and a #7. So to have 3 in a row like that, it's just suddenly there's a lot of people that want your attention, there's things you got to do and you've never done before. And it's an awful lot to deal with, but there's a lot of joy in it. And, there's things you experience that aren't as joyful, but it's all part of my past, and I'm grateful for all of it.
We talk to a lot of entrepreneurs that once they have success, let's say it's a #1 hit, or it could be something that they've done in business, that they don't know either how to handle the success, or that they may go into a depression because then they got to go, how do I achieve more than what I just achieved? Did you experience anything like that?
I wouldn't put my experience that way. And I suppose, I didn't have a hit record until I was 37 years old. At that point, almost everybody in Nashville would have said I was too old to even get a record deal. 37, it seems young now at 61, but at 37, I was considered too old to even get a record deal. If we're out of the box, they're looking for people that are 18, 19, 20, 21. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of the things that happen to young artists, like you just described, or happen to young entrepreneurs. When you have success when you're really young, you process it different than if you've had some time to live. So I was 37 years old when I had my first hit record. I had already had a successful business. I'd had my ups and downs. I'd been through some life and some living. So I think some of those kinds of things didn't impact me as much. I felt fortunate to have had it happen. I did the best that I could. And I figured if I was going to keep it going, that I would just keep, doing it the way that I did it before. How did I get there? I would just try to repeat that. For a number of different reasons, I pulled away from all of that. Sometimes people say, like I was on a podcast last week called Remember Me. And they asked me like, well, so what happened? Why did your career end? Well, I think there's that general perception sometimes people have when you go out of the spotlight that your career ended. My career didn't end. I've made 18 albums in the last 15 years. I've continued to be on the road traveling. I'm just not in the spotlight anymore, not on a major label where they're spending the money to promote. And, it was probably 2004, 2005. I just chose to step away from it all. There was a lot going on in my life, and I had it was kind of an unfortunate experience at a major label there. And I just realized that wasn't a position I wanted to put myself in anymore. One of the joys of being an entrepreneur is that you get to be your own boss, right? So when you're an artist on a major record label, it's not really like being an entrepreneur. There's an entrepreneurial part of it, but whoever is running that label has the power and the ability to essentially just pull the plug on your business at any time. And I just, found myself in a place around 2004 where I said, I'm never going to let that happen to me again. Where I put my whole heart and soul and life into something, and somebody just willy-nilly, decides that they're going to pull the plug, and your whole business just goes to nothing. That was an experience I had that was, really, really difficult. And I just decided that I was never going to let that happen to me again. So I stepped away from it. So, I did what I could at that point to move forward with my talents and my abilities and the success that I had experienced, and try to capitalize on that and build what was next. And it led me to where I am now, which is the happiest I've ever been in my adult life. Everything that happens to us, we have a choice of how we're going to respond to it. We always have a choice. Like I wouldn't have wanted those things to happen to me, but I did have a choice in how I was going to respond. And so I responded the best that I knew how, and all of that led me to here. And so I'm good with all of it.
That's it for the first half of our interview with Michael Peterson. Make sure to tune in next time to hear the second half of the interview. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to check out our Facebook group. The link is in the description of this episode. We'd love to hear from you and create some discussion around all of our awesome guests. So if you're out there, let me know. Don't worry, I can just sit here twiddling my thumbs until I hear from you. I've got all day. Anyway, that's enough of me, and I'll see you next time.